My name is Grant, hence the name Grant Loves Books, this YouTube channel that has been going on for nearly 3 years now. I hope to read as much of the best literature that I possibly can in a tragically short lifespan. That's what I love. I love to read books. And I like books that are weird. A book that is written by an author with a singular voice who wants to show the world something unique, like a real work of art in the form of a novel. That is what I love. I've read a lot of boring stuff. I've read a lot of absurd stuff. I've read some very exciting novels. I've read some very romantic novels. I've read some very depressing novels. I've read some very, novels that at the end of it I thought, well, what the hell was the point of all that? But I have never read a novel in any way similar to this one, The Ogre, by Michel Tournier. And sometimes it also goes by another name, The Earl King. For the sake of this video, because this is what I've got in my hand, The Ogre. Where to begin with this novel? Well, I think it's always a safe bet to begin with the plot. Chapter 1, Sinister Writings of Abel Tifauges. I'm sorry, my French is awful. Please correct me on my French pronunciation. Our protagonist is quite a tall, strange man who is working as an automotive mechanic in somewhere near Paris or just on the cusp of the Paris boundary. And right away from the beginning we learn that his wife has left him because it's not because of his small penis. It's because of how selfishly he uses it. Not very attentive to his wife's physical desires. And I knew that this was going to be a really fun book to read when I read this. So he's writing in his diary that his wife has left him. So his wife yells at him, "You don't give a damn about my pleasure." And I can't but admit it. When I engulfed and annexed Rachel with all my body, the last thing I thought about was what might be going on behind those closed eyelids, inside that little Hebrew shepherd's head. You sate yourself with raw flesh and go straight back to your car bodies. It was true. And it's also true that a man that's eating bread doesn't bother about whether the loaf is satisfied or not. And I thought, oh my, this is going to be a fun book to read. The author who can write a line like that, caustic yet wonderfully funny. So chapter 1, the sinister writings of Abel, is that he's damaged or broken his right hand, and he's decided with his left hand that he's going to start writing a diary, and he's going to do it with his left hand. And he discovers, now he's never realized this before, that he can write perfectly well with his left hand, but he's never tried it before. And so he starts keeping his left-handed diary, writing about some of the craziest trauma that he went through when he was a child at a boarding school. And through the writing in chapter 1, where he's exploring the unbelievable things that occurred in his childhood, he discovers that the greatest joy that he can find in his life is picking up a child and carrying a child. This action sends him into transcendence. He feels that there is some divine inspiration happening in him when he carries a child. I'll just leave that there because I don't want to assume and I don't want to insinuate. There's a lot in this book that I felt that way. I'll read the words and I will understand the sentences and I will try to construct the jigsaw puzzle, but I won't reflect on these things too much. I'll put the pieces and I'll look at the structure that they are making, but I'm not going to judge or ruminate on the picture that is being assembled, because the overall picture of this novel is nearly incomprehensible. And I don't think I've ever said that about any other book at all. What happens is that he gets himself into a little bit of trouble because one of his hobbies, once his wife leaves him, is that he starts going to the local school where the children attend, and he takes photographs of the children. Okay, again, let's just leave that hanging in the air. That is what he does. He takes photographs of the children, he takes them home, and he develops these photographs. And one day he is discovered, and his dark room that is filled with hundreds of photographs of children gets him arrested, and he is sent to prison for this. And while he is in prison, he has the choice of to stay in prison or to join the French army, which he does. He joins the army, and while he is, the stages of things getting bizarre just escalate. You know, like the first step, you know, we can take that step, but then the next step seems a more severe step. Like, wow, okay, all right, that is another step forward in this. Like, I don't even have the words. It's not absurd, it's not tragic, it's not horrifying, but it's a mix of those things. Okay, all right, let's try to keep going. While he is a French soldier, he discovers that he has this extremely strong affinity for pigeons, and pigeons are still being used to send messages. And he becomes quite a pigeon expert. Like, he can hold them in his hands, see what variety, and he can tell if they are going to be a healthy bird. Like, he is so familiar with the wingspan and their chest measurements and the length of their feet and the length of their neck and the way that the pigeon walks and the way that the pigeon is cooing. He just becomes like a savant. Like, you really wonder about the author, how much does this man know about everything? It was very easy for me to get carried away in the story, but sometimes I would just put the book down and be amazed. I would marvel at the knowledge that this author has. Several times throughout this novel, he will go off on these descriptive passages of pigeons and hunting. Like, how is the best way to go hunting for elk? How is the best way to deal with the carcass of the elk that you've just shot so that you can transport it back home for cooking? The knowledge of this author and the abstruse information that is in this novel is, like, it's beyond reckoning, honestly. He becomes a pigeon specialist, and then he's captured by the Germans. And he's sent to a French prisoner of war camp. But then, when he's a prisoner of war, he distinguishes himself because, first of all, he's an auto mechanic, so the Germans can make use of that. And then they discover he has this affinity for animals, pigeons and horses. And the Germans decide that they can use this man, this French prisoner, if he's willing. And he is willing, has no compunctions about leaving his French prisoners in arms, if that's the right phrase, to join the Germans and to help them with their military exploits, which is when he goes to this castle of Raumenten to become a horse specialist and to assist with the people that work in the forests who ensure the good population of the deer and the moose, like a forest warden. He becomes the assistant to this warden because, again, his affinity for animals and his, good touch with automobiles. And ultimately, he ends up as the Ogre of Kaltenborn. And what he does is he goes scouring the German countryside for young German boys to join the Hitler Youth. He really does become the evil creature from a fairy tale. He becomes this monster on horseback who goes to these tiny villages looking for young boys to kidnap away from their parents and to say, yes, we're going to take you to the castle and you will never see your family again because we are going to train you in the Hitler Youth. That's the story of the novel. And I think maybe I've told you 25% of what happens in the book because so much happens. I love to read, and I especially love to read about the Second World War. I like to have a portrait painted for me, something that gives me an image of what might have happened in that war to anyone, an auto mechanic from the suburbs of Paris. What could have happened. Now in this novel it's so fantastic, again impossible, the things that happen, but it does make for a goddamn wonderful book to read. But again, like I feel like I've been saying quite a lot in 2024, that this is a book that you need a strong stomach. Like this is not a book for lightweights. This is not a book for someone who is, nowadays, for the younger generation, they give, what do they call it? Trigger warnings. Warning, you might be triggered by every goddamn chapter of this novel, because there's a lot in it that normally in today's world doesn't often see the light of day. Quite a lot of the dark and devious and hideous things that once happened in the Second World War are in here. I want to read you a little bit. First of all, the dedication. You open it up and you think, okay, all right. Like I like this company. I like French authors. I like books about the Second World War. I like dark, dirty, devious stuff. I'm ready to read this. And then I read the dedication and I think, oh, maybe I'm not quite ready for this one. Here it is. This book is dedicated to Rasputin. How many other books have been dedicated to Rasputin? So after all of these ridiculous misadventures from France to Germany, he's going to a major German city and he's commenting on the patriotic fervor. Went to Johannesburg this morning for a load of mattresses. Big military parade in the Adolf Hitler Strasse. Don't know why. Big crowd. The half of it that was in uniform, i.e. that was made uniform, homogenized, all rolled into one under the same cloth, the same leather, the same steel, moved forward at a walking pace, a uniform walking pace, like a giant centipede, unrolling its field gray length along the road. This part of the crowd is in an advanced state of the metamorphosis that makes several million Germans into one great, irresistible sleepwalker, the Wehrmacht. The individuals enveloped in the great entity, like a shoal of sardines in the belly of a whale, are already being crushed together and on the point of merging into one another. In the other half of the crowd, this process is only at an early stage. The variegated and irregular foam of civilians comes and goes chaotically on the sidewalks and under the trees. But the digestive juices of the great green snake reach out in powerful waves toward these little individuals still for the moment free. That mournful, obsessive music, the heavy tramp of the legions on the march, the air regularly filled by the same swell of voices, the swastika flags rippling in the breeze, all this ritual enchantment secretly works on their nervous system and paralyzes their wills. A mortal pleasure grips their innards, brings tears to their eyes, freezes them in an exquisite and poisonous fascination called patriotism. Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer. But the monolithic block of the Reich already has a large crack in it. So where do we go from there? Why don't we read the author's bio? Born in Paris in 1924, wow, 100 years old. Congratulations. Happy 100th birthday, Michel. Michel Tournier has, present tense, has unusually close ties to Germany. Both his parents were German scholars, and he studied at the University of Tübingen. He holds master's degrees in both law and philosophy, and worked for some years at a large French publishing house. He is fascinated by photography and has produced his own programs for French television. His first novel, Friday, won the Grand Prix du Roman at the Académie Française. His second novel, The Ogre, is the only novel ever to win France's most prestigious literary prize, the Prix Goncourt, by a unanimous vote. My. Like his two subsequent novels, Gemini and The Four Wise Men, they received enthusiastic reviews around the world. A bachelor, Michel Tournier lives near Paris. He acts as a cultural consultant for French television, but devotes most of his time to writing. There is so much stuff in this novel. Now, maybe it looks to be a big book, but it's not actually. 373 pages. It's not too long, but it is dense. But the density of this novel is not, it's not something that you have to, it feels like you're smashing your head against the wall to try to understand. The sentences are very poetic. Maybe I didn't read it very beautifully, but the writing is so playfully constructed. And that's what literature is all about, as far as I'm concerned, is that the sentences are expressing common ideas. Like in that passage that I read, he's talking about how regular people are hypnotized into a state of stupidity by this rampant patriotism. But the way he writes it and the metaphor he uses for the sardines in the whale's belly, like that is the best thing about literature, is when the author, because you have to do it with a light touch. You can't be too heavy-handed. You can't smash it into people's faces, your metaphors and your beautiful, playful language, because then it comes across, well, heavy-handed and not enjoyable to read because you feel like you're getting hit over the head. Like, oh, here are the words that I know. Here's my beautiful metaphors. It has to be done, that light touch that I love the most in literature. Later in the novel, there's this bit where he's at this castle. He's this ogre, and he's looking at all of these children, these young Hitler youths, and he's admiring their beautiful hair and their blue eyes and their well-constructed German bodies. And it's really so strange, this novel. But it's a very important novel. Important in what way, Grant? Well, just important in the way that everybody who loves literature out there, find a copy and read it, because this book cannot be forgotten. Like we cannot just let this book fade away. It is too well written, and the story is too outrageous to ever forget about what a great novel this is. Please get your hands on a copy. I'll read you one more thing, and that will be my final statement on this book. This is him talking about the difference between Germany and France. Now he knew what it was he had come to seek so far in the northeast, in the cold and penetrating Hyperborean light. All symbols shone with unparalleled brilliance. Unlike the oceanic land of France, shrouded in mists, its lines blurred by receding shades, continental Germany, more harsh and rudimentary, was the country of strong, simplified, stylized drawing, easy to read and remembered. In France, things got lost in impressions, vague gestures, incomplete wholes. In murky skies and infinities of tenderness, the Frenchman had a horror of position, uniform, strictly defined place in organization or hierarchy. A French postman always liked to remind people by a certain unbuttoned look to his uniform that he was also a father, a voter, and a bowling enthusiast. Whereas the German postman, bundled up in his smart uniform, exactly coincided with his role. Similarly, the German housewife, schoolboy, chimney sweep, and businessman were all more housewife, schoolboy, chimney sweep, or businessman than their French counterparts. And while the French propensity led to the weakness of faded colors, spinelessness, dangerous laxities like promiscuity, dirt, and cowardice, Germany was always in danger of becoming a theater of grimace and caricature, as demonstrated by her army, a fine collection of gargoyles from the ox-like sergeant major to the corseted and monocled officer. But for Tiffauges, for whom the heavens, studded with allegories and hieroglyphs, resounded constantly with dim voices and enigmatic cries, Germany was revealing itself as the promised land, the land of pure essences. I think what is today? Today is June the 21st, Friday. I'm going to be running in the Vancouver Half Marathon in 2 days. I think this is going to be one of the best books that I will read this entire year. Certainly it will be. Definitely it will be in the top 5. It will really be hard to imagine a book that's going to be better than this year. The subject matter is you want to pull the bed sheets up, hope that the monsters don't get you, because the monsters are on parade in this novel, for sure. The writing is just poetic. I can't say enough about it, but I think the less I say about it, the more that I hope to intrigue you into reading this novel, because you won't ever read anything like this ever again. I'm so happy I found this book. Like, I found this book in a secondhand store in like a nowhere village in Ontario when I went to go visit some family. And there were a lot of books in that bookstore that I picked up, but they were damaged by wet. You know, the pages were all warped, they all smelled musty, and there were a lot of books that I wanted to buy, but I put back on the shelf because they were already damaged. Like, it was, you know, it's not nice to read a book that's going to fall apart in your hand. So I bought this one because of the publishing company, because, you know, it's the same publishing company that published Hopscotch by Cortazar. Just based on that, based on the publishing company, because I sometimes you can have faith in certain authors, certain publishing companies. And God, was my faith ever well placed in this regard. Hey, let's have a book magazine lottery. We haven't had one for ages. If you support the channel on Patreon, I will put your name into this little jar. There's actually quite a few names in there. It's just you can't see them because they're all kind of stuck together for whatever reason. I think it's because I haven't done a magazine book lottery for a while. But there are names in there. And if you support me on Patreon, then your name can be chosen. And what do I win, Grant? You'll win my self-published magazine called The Friend from Budapest. In here, we've got 3 short stories that I've written, and they've all been published. I hope that you know that that means that these are good short stories. You know, like I'm not a complete amateur when it comes to writing. I've only printed 100 of these. Will it be a collector's item? Of course it will. Hold on to it. God, it's going to be worth thousands. You could pass that on to the next generation and say, there is that self-published magazine from that guy on YouTube, on the internet, who talks about books nobody's ever heard of. And this is number 59. So that will be your individual copy, and I'll sign that to whoever's name I pull out. I'm sorry it's become so ragged, but like, I really spent a lot of time thinking about this novel, and it took me a while to read it because it is very dense, and it is a very serious novel about some really weird stuff. So I'm sorry it's kind of beat up, but I'll send you this, and it's heavy. And if you join Patreon, then you'll get whichever book I'm reviewing in the future, unless it's a library book. I'm really very sad to part with this book, because this is something special. This is something you're really not going to find easily. Who will be the lucky Patreon? Thank you, by the way, to all of my supporters on Patreon. Christopher, wow, it's about time. Christopher is a supporter of mine from Alabama, and he wrote to me several months ago, it seems, and he said, you know, I live in this small conservative community in Alabama, and I really like your videos because you talk about some very dirty books that probably in Alabama nobody's ever read, and so I like your channel and I want to support it with some money every month. I'm glad I could be your supplier of deviant literature. And now I'm going to mail you this. Man, I hope you don't get in trouble for this in Alabama. I really hope you read this book, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did, because this is, you know, it's a once-in-a-lifetime kind of a book. It's a book that you never forget. Like, it always comes back to you. It's a book that is unforgettable, simply. Like, it is something that will stick with you for the rest of your life. I'm sure of that. Congratulations, Christopher. I'm really happy that you got this one because, well, because he supports the channel with like quite a generous amount of money every month. I was really surprised when he registered. I was like, wow, ooh, a big spender. Oh, man, I'm sorry I'm going to lose that one, but it's okay. You deserve it. Thank you very much, everyone, for watching. I hope that video made sense. It felt like it was really all over the goddamn place. Have a great day. Take care. There's a fucking car alarm going off. I hope it's not disturbing the video too much. One of these days I'm going to be a rich, famous YouTuber, and I'm going to get my own little room. That's what every middle-aged man wants. They want their own room. A room with no wife things and no children things. My room with all my books and a desk and I'm going to write out my memoirs about how badly I wanted to get my room.